So when we're talking about laying it down, that's what I'm speaking to, is anything that may feel like a burden in our life right now, like that seems to get sort of entangled in our minds or entrenched in our being in some way. Like perhaps it's like that we need to lay down like the story that we have about ourselves, like some story we have about ourselves that we know is not true, but that we inherited at some point in our lives. Perhaps it's this inability to stop giving permission for people to treat us in a certain way that we know is not good for our being. Perhaps it's just the stress and the fear and the worry or loneliness or suspicion that we've been carrying around, that we know has been bringing us suffering in some way, but that we've just kind of gotten used to in some strange way. I think we all have a felt sense, what that might be for us, what might be burdening us right now, that we know there's some part of us that's sort of asking us to lay it down. So, as we start this talk today, I'd invite you just to think about what that is, what it is that you need to lay down right now. For the writers of this song that Katrina just sang, Rachel Price and Bridget Kearney, the thing that they're talking about, at least at first, is this thing called hate. And I love this line. If you didn't catch it, that opening line goes, "Hate casts a long shadow, and I know that I lie in it, and I let it rule my mind from time to time. Escaping an old battle, clings like a vine to me, whispers dirty lies in my ear." Oh, I just love the imagery there. I love how poetry and song can say so much. And, I love how it gives this image of how hate can cast this long shadow, and it can actually rule our mind. And things that we are seeking to lay down can have that effect on us sometimes, right? It can prohibit us from actually being able to see clearly, to see ourselves clearly, and also often to see others clearly as well. It can actually color everything we see. And the things we need to lay down are often those things that are whispering in our ear. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's that itty-bitty issue committee that I talked about before. And at some point, even if it's not being whispered in our ear, we begin whispering it to ourselves long after whoever originally whispered that into our ear or yelled it in our face or affirmed it in some way, long after they've been done saying that, right? And yet, I feel a lot of this energy coming around these days, and it does feel kind of sticky. It can feel this kind of sticky energy sometimes, clinging to us like a vine. And I love that, just clings to us like a vine, like those vines that we see clinging to these Douglas firs and these other trees around here. I don't know if you guys have seen those vines. They kind of look pretty at first. When I first got here, I was oh, cool vines. Those are so magical. Look how pretty those are. And then you realize, oh, those vines are actually killing those trees, right? And these things that we're seeking to lay down, they can do the same thing. They can begin slowly as they grow, and if we let them grow, begin to literally suck the life out of us. At some point, we can begin to feel that. Yeah. When we first got here, when I was visiting here, when I had first said yes to this position, but before I had actually moved here, I got to spend some time with the Walker family. And Michael Walker, who many of you who are local probably know, he was talking to me about this phenomenon, about these vines, and how he, every chance he gets, will stop by the side of the road and just tear those vines down from the trees, rescuing those trees. And I was shocked by this because I was man, Michael, there's a lot of those trees out there. But it didn't matter, right? He wasn't discouraged by that. He still knew that, it mattered to that one tree. He still did it with joy and enthusiasm, regardless of that. And that's, for me, that's so truly inspiring. So this energy, the chorus, right, that comes around after the songwriters are talking about hate of I can change, I can still change. Y'all, I cried when I first heard this song. You know when you first hear a song and it's just like speaking directly to you? And you're like, I gotta listen to that again. And I gotta listen to that again. Like that's how it was for me because it just hit me so hard. Like that chorus of I can change and like I can still change. It's just like it got to me, right? It got to me. And it was like this mantra that was telling me the truest truth of my life that like despite how many times those dirty lies have been whispered in my ear, like no matter how many times I've repeated those whispers without ever fully realizing it, like no matter how much my view has been obscured by shadow, no matter how sticky and thick those vines may feel, no matter how long an unhealthy story has felt like a controlling force in my life or felt inescapable, like I can still change. Like I can still not allow it to rule my heart. Like I won't allow it to be the greatest thing. So when we talk about, laying our burdens down, we can realize that we always have this ability to change. We always have this ability, no matter how long we've been carrying around this burden. There's this voice of wisdom within us. And sometimes we need to lay some things down, and sometimes, like Michael Walker, we need to rip those things down. Sometimes it takes that kind of energy. Sometimes it takes that kind of fortitude with some of the things that seem super sticky in our lives. And here's the thing, I think, the spiritual path, this is honestly what it's all about. It's less about gaining things and more about letting go of things that get in the way of remembering who we are and who we're here to be, and the ways in which our soul is seeking to express in the world. So much of the spiritual path is simply laying those things down. And there's this part of us, right, whether we call it spirit, our higher selves, our source, perhaps we call it our intuition, that just demands this from us, demands that we take care of ourselves, that we lay down those burdens enough so that like the true life and light of who we are can be revealed and expressed and felt and lived from and given out back into the world, It demands that we take care of ourselves in that way. So speaking of taking care of ourselves, the holidays are coming up, y'all. It is crazy. And I know the holidays can be an incredibly joyous time for many. And I also know they can also bring out a lot of stress. And the very things that we are seeking to lay down, right? These things are like, oh yeah, these are the things I actually need to lay down. Often, like the holidays could be the time where they just like kind of rear their ugly heads, like where they reveal themselves most clearly during that time. Does anyone feel me on that? And I know often like this time can bring up, ways that we also feel like this need that we have to care for others so much. And listen, it's not inherently a bad thing, right? Like there are moments in life where we are called to help others, but there are also times when we are also called to lay down that role of like, it's my job just to hold everything together, to be the person that always has it together. And that burden of feeling not only like that we have to take care of all of our own burdens, but we have to take care of everybody else's burdens. Perhaps like you hold that role in your family, and perhaps this time is also an opportunity to lay down that as well. Like, for me, I found in my own life that I struggle with this. Like us people-pleasing types. We kind of struggle with this. Perhaps there's some other people-pleasing types in the room. And I know like at the beginning, there's this kind of like this nobility in that and feeling like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Like this is there, like I feel really great about holding this role of holding my own burdens and holding the burdens of everyone and holding the burdens of the world, like how I feel so noble in that, right? And it can feel like that for a while until perhaps, and this doesn't always happen, until perhaps that can feel a little bit out of balance, right? We believe like the more that we carry, the worthier we are, right? But it can take over at some point. And the flip side of that is that we can sometimes come to believe, and here's the thing, that our value in life is directly proportional to how many burdens we are carrying for ourselves or others. You know what I'm saying? And that simply is not true. And that is why this thing, right, of carrying our burdens and letting them go can feel scary, because perhaps we have been someone who has not only gotten into the practice of deriving our value from how many burdens we are carrying, but feeling like, I don't even know who I am if I'm not carrying these burdens, right? Like, I don't even know who I am anymore. But listen, I think what I'm learning right now, that we are not meant to only learn through suffering. Listen, like we learn a lot through discomfort. We can learn a lot from the things that push us in life. That is true. But we can also learn from balance. We can also learn from peace. And we can also learn from restoring balance in the force, right? Like restoring balance in our lives in ways that we're being really called to in our life. Like, we're not born onto this earth to earn our worthiness. Yes. We are already worthy as we are right now. Like, there's no earning worthiness. There's no earning lovability. Like, we're lovable as hell. Every single one of us. And it reminds me of this Mary Oliver poem. Mary Oliver I just love. And I think this is one of the first poems I've ever read of hers. Perhaps you might be familiar with it, but I want to share a part of it with you now. It simply says, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. I love that Mary Oliver is pointing to our bodily wisdom here. I've always wondered what she meant by the soft animal of your body, but for whatever reason, I've always thought about dogs when I hear this poem. Oh yes, that's like the perfect image for this. And like how, these dogs, when you've earned trust, although there's some dogs that like do this when you first meet them, like when you're walking down the street, that's how much trust they have in the world. But how they just like lie on their backs and they expose their sweet little bellies, And I realize how vulnerable this position is for any animal, and how that soft belly is so tender. And how this particular position, right, is like, this is talk about a mudra, like a sacred, stance. Like, that's sacred, just like sacred stance, just like lying down on your back, exposing the most vulnerable part of yourself. It's an absolute surrender to being loved and to loving what it loves, which is tummy rubs. Like, we could be like this too, community. Like, I'm telling you right now, I'm saying this to each one of you, and I want you to hear me. We don't have to be good. We don't have to constantly and tirelessly crawl on our knees in the desert, seeking to fulfill the expectations of others. Thinking that if we just do this thing or fulfill this expectation, that we will earn the belonging that we yearn for. Like, instead, there's a part of our body, our very body temples, that simply knows what is good, what is actually good, knows what we need, what we actually need, knows what we love, what we actually love. And then not only do we have access to that in any moment and every moment, but we have full right to experience that all the time, to care for ourselves gently. We are loved because we are made of love. So the universe had a pretty hilarious and direct sense of humor with me this week. Like, I've been fairly exhausted recently and really just feeling the need to take a break. And God, I'm so lucky to be supported by Reverend Shannon and practitioner Sarah and our staff and our practitioners here and the entire congregation and volunteers in helping me to take a break. I'm taking all next week off, by the way. Really excited for that. But on Friday night, I guess it was technically like very early Saturday morning, at 1:30 a.m., just like a baby crying out in the night, our smoke alarm just started beeping. Our smoke alarm, and it wasn't the alarm, it was just that like annoying little chirp You all know what I'm talking about. It just happens like every 30 seconds. And I literally, just a few minutes later, another alarm in the house, I think it was our carbon monoxide alarm, started doing the same exact thing. And so there was two beeps going off super loud in the middle of the night. And it was like this literal wake-up call, because it woke us up, like this literal wake-up call to me. Because what was happening was, as you all know, the smoke alarms were simply saying, our battery is low. You have to change the battery. And we all know that it does that because a smoke alarm cannot do its one job without a full battery intact, right? And so I was like, well, I got it, right? Like, I got it. Can I go back to sleep now? Like, I got it. So, this thing of laying down our burdens, I think it's something that we all need. This particular thing of rest, of Sabbath, of needing so that I know I'm needing deeply right now. Like, it reminded me of this passage from the New Testament, from the book of Matthew in the Bible. It's a very famous passage, so some of you might be familiar with it. It's talking about rest for the weary and burdened. Here's what it says. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, I'm going to be honest. A yoke does not sound light. And it does not feel like a lifting of a burden to put on a yoke, even one that fits me perfectly. Yet, like most spiritual stories and myths, right? When seen through the eyes of metaphor and mystery, so much can come alive. Like, yokes actually allow for animals to be led and to work in tandem with another animal to pull together as one. I'm finding a lot of relevance in this ancient passage, like when I'm most burdened or exhausted, and finding, just like finding that like I can pause and lay those burdens down. When I actually do that, I find that I'm more able to be guided by something within me. I am more able to be led by that part of me that knows what I need in the moment, that absolutely knows how to let that soft belly of my being love what it loves. That's able to like lay down also like false narratives that cause harm, right? False narratives that I have about myself and false narratives that I have about others. And instead allow something greater, like something deeper, something more aligned with who I am and who I am aspiring to be. It's that voice of wisdom, that source of spiritual light that Reverend Shannon has been speaking to us about. It can actually like light up our lives and begin to lead the way. When I lay my burdens down, like I feel like I am in essence just being joined with that part of me in a deeper way, co-creating together. And in fact, the etymology of that word yoke means to join. So it's a process of deep surrender. I find that when we allow ourselves rest, it's like lying on our backs and getting belly rubs from the divine. In the season of autumn, you all, like, it's also teaching us about this kind of surrender. I mean, Reverend Shannon gave this beautiful talk last week and quoted the amazing Adrian Rich, who says, "The moment of change is the only poem." There's poetry in surrender. There is poetry in change. And often, to actually be able to receive the gifts of change, we must surrender to it. Every time we see a leaf falling from the tree, it's a signal that the tree is actually pulling back and pulling in all of its sap and energy into the innermost parts of their beings and bodies. The trees themselves are going within, and by doing so, they are letting go of so much. We can be inspired to do the same. There's a poem by Lucille Clifton that is entitled "The Lesson of Falling Leaves." It says, "The leaves believe, such letting go is love. Such love is faith. Such faith is grace. Such grace is God. I agree with the leaves. If letting go is love, and love is faith, and faith is grace, and grace is God itself, then this act of laying down our burdens, this act of letting go is also a restoration of our faith. It's an opening to grace. It's in fact, that very thing of laying down our burdens is a direct experience of the divine. So as we begin to close this talk today, I want to bring us full circle back to the song that Katrina sang before the talk. And that was also helping me to process some of the complexity of this upcoming holiday that has a pretty dark history and some of the things that have been going on in the world, like the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. In an interview with the two women that wrote this song, singer and songwriter Rachel Price talks about the motivation behind the song and what it's about for her. She said, "It's a song that Bridget and I wrote. It's about a person who's looking at various things that are going on in the world and feeling a lot of frustration and anger over it. And instead of giving into those feelings, they're choosing to look inside themselves and say, well, I have the ability to change myself." So as we're listening to the melody of this song, I want to bring up the last verse of the song one more time. It says, "Tracing an old pattern, drawing the lines from where I am and from where I want to be. Forget that old adage that history continues to keep us from the world we want to see. I'm scared that I won't get it right, but fear won't rule my heart tonight. I can change, I can change, I can still change." So as we enter into this holiday season, I invite us all to look at the real history of this holiday that we are about to celebrate, to allow it to be a place in which we can learn the actual history and the ways in which Indigenous history is American history, and to allow learning about the history, which is kind of dark, to bring us into a sense of oneness and solidarity with the peoples who are still struggling today, who still face oppression, but are still having this ability to keep their culture alive and to share their wisdom with the world. This is how we come back into community, that we can express gratitude for all the things that we have in the world, but we can too, through learning the actual history, through realizing that Indigenous history is American history, that the people that we read about in the books aren't gone, like they're all still here, that we have this opportunity to change, that we can still change no matter what has come before, no matter what, if we've never done this before, we can still change. That racial injustice, that the ways in which we are seeing institutionalized racism be a part of every system in our country, that we can still change that. That we must never bow to despair, that we must always come back into this place where we know we can lay down the burden of feeling discouragement and despair and come into a moment where we can change, both individually and collectively. So let's not just talk about it, y'all. Let's be about it. Let's allow our own burdens, the laying down of our own burdens, to become a place in which where we can allow the world to wake us up to that which is calling out for love, calling out for healing, and calling out for more change. We have been born for this time. And we are all meeting it in a way that is not only waking us up, but waking us up to the love of the world in the way that is seeking to be known.